Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. So we're going to start getting really hands-on. We're going to log into the console now. The rest of this section of the course is going to be all lab-based, so you will need to log into the AWS console. And in this lecture, what we're going to do is go ahead and create an S3 bucket. Now, if you're confused about the name bucket, don't worry. It's basically a folder in which you're going to store your objects, and objects are simply files. So go ahead and log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. If you notice up here, I'm currently in Northern Virginia. There's a whole bunch of different regions that I can choose. And if I go up to services, I will be able to see S3 under storage. Now, S3 is one of the oldest services that AWS have. And for that very reason, it is featured very, very heavily in both the Developer Associate exam as well as the Solutions Architect Associate exam. So we click into S3 and we get this great little splash screen. Now, notice up here, it's changed my region to global. So you manage your S3 buckets at a global level. So you could have an S3 bucket in London or an S3 bucket in Northern Virginia or in Sydney, but you'll be able to see them all here as a concise list. So you don't need to change your regions, which makes it a lot easier to use. So what we want to do now is go ahead and create a bucket. Now, your bucket name has to be unique. So if I type something in like test bucket, that should probably be in use by somebody else. Let's go ahead and hit next. There you go. Bucket name already exists. And the reason for this is it's using a DNS namespace. So you'll be able to access your buckets via a DNS address. And the DNS address is simply a web address. So you have a web address for your buckets. So test bucket isn't going to work. People keep stealing the A Cloud Guru bucket name. So I'm going to try A Cloud Guru. Let's try 2017, see if that is available. No, stop stealing my buckets, guys. So I'll do A Cloud Guru 2017 Ryan. Now in here we can change our region. So where do you want your bucket to be placed? I'm based out of London right now, so I'm going to click in to put it into London. And you can copy your settings from an existing bucket. Now you see up here there's all these different phases that you can go through. You could just hit create and try and create the bucket directly, but I want to go ahead and set properties, permissions, and then reviews. So go ahead and hit next. So in here we have versioning. We're going to cover that off in the next lecture of this course. In here we've got logging, so set up access logs, records that provide details about access requests. So you can log who does what to your bucket. And here we've got tags, so you can use tags to track your costs against different projects or criteria. So in tags, you might want to click in here and add a tag, and we could say something like owner, and this is the finance team. We'll go ahead and hit save, and you can have quite a few tags in there as well. So go ahead and hit next, and in here we can manage our users. Now here, I'm actually logged in as a root account. I've been a little bit naughty, so A Cloud Guru Alexa. This is our Alexa account that we use for the free Alexa course, and I don't have any other user IDs on this account just now. Here you can add access for other AWS accounts. So in here, these are your current AWS, the current account that you're using. So if you've got multiple users in there, you'd add them here. Here is where you can give access to other AWS accounts. And lots of people, lots of companies will have multiple AWS accounts. You might have one for your test and dev team, then you might have a separate one for production. So you can add additional accounts in here. In here, you can see manage public permissions. Do not grant public read access to this bucket, recommended. Now, by default, all buckets are private, and you could click on here and grant public read access to this bucket, but I'm going to leave it as the default, and we'll go through and look at how we can make our buckets readable later on, or objects within our buckets. In here, manage system permissions, so do not grant S3 log delivery group write access to this bucket. This is basically when you're using it for logging. By default, it does not grant S3 log delivery access to this bucket. Go ahead and hit next. And in here, you can just review all of the changes that you've made. So we can see my bucket name is A Cloud Guru 2017 Ryan. The region I'm deploying it is in London. Versioning is disabled. Logging is disabled. Tagging, I've put one tag in there. Permissions, only one user has access to this bucket, and that's my root account. And then public permissions disabled. Systems permissions disabled. So go ahead and create the bucket. And there we go, we've got our bucket. And as you have more and more buckets here, you'll see them fill up. So we've got A Cloud Guru 2017 Ryan. Click in here. Let's upload some files to our bucket. So go to upload. I'm going to add 2 files. Let's go over to my downloads directory. So we've got the A Cloud Guru logo, and we've also got some Alexa skills. And that is, we do have a free Alexa course if you're interested on the A Cloud Guru platform. So go ahead and hit open. Now it's ready to upload. You go ahead and hit upload, and that is it. You can see it uploading down here. You've got your operations, so we've got 1 in progress. We've got 0 successful at the moment and 0 that have had an error. And there we go, we have 1 success. So the reason it says 1 success instead of 2 successes is because it was all done in 1 upload. So it's 1 successful upload. Now, your browser, if you were doing this via the command line, you would get a HTTP 200 code saying that the upload has been successful. Really important to remember that going into your exams. So straight away, I've got my 2 objects, and these are just files sitting inside my buckets. So by clicking the object, we bring up all the different overviews and properties and permissions of the object. And you can see here straight away, I've got a link to the object. And if I was to click on this link, I get this XML file, and it basically says error, code, access denied. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen The Lawnmower Man, but they have this scene in it where he keeps saying access denied, all over and over again. So it kind of reminds me of that. And so you get this because by default, your buckets are private and all your objects inside your buckets are going to be private as well. So if we go back to our bucket and click on our object, how can we make this object public? Well, you can actually just go up here and go to more. And you'll see there's a thing here that says make public, and you can click on that and that will make the object public. You get this little warning message here that says everyone will have access to one or all of the following. Read this object, read and write permissions. So go ahead and you can click make public. Now if you click on it in here and then click the link again, you should see, there you go, the A Cloud Guru logo. Now I'm just going to go back in my browser and we will be able to click on the bucket again. And then we can go in and have a look at the permissions on this particular object. So if we scroll down and actually click on permissions, now we can see here under permissions, we've got 3 different types of permissions. They're our owner access. So what is the owner of this account allowed to access within this bucket? So you can see my account here, and then I have the ability to read the object's permissions, as well as the ability to write to the object. Access for other AWS accounts, so I could click in here and add another AWS account and give them permission to access this object, and also public access. So we've got a group that says everyone, they're allowed to read the object, they're not allowed to read the object's permission, and they're not allowed to write object permissions to it. Up here we can click on properties. So right here we've got the object is stored in our storage class, which is standard. If I click in here, I can change this. So I could say standard infrequently accessed or reduce redundancy storage. So this is where you use it to store non-critical reproducible data at lower levels of redundancy, but then you also save on cost. Infrequently accessed is basically where you're not going to be accessing this object very frequently. So you still have a lower storage cost, but the same level of redundancy as standard. So I'm going to leave it as standard and just hit cancel. In here, we can also look at encryption. So we can go ahead and encrypt this object. This is server-side encryption. So basically, if I was inside AWS's data centers and I was trying to look at this object, outside the AWS account, so let's say I was like looking at the actual physical disk, this object would be encrypted, so I wouldn't be able to read it. So you can go ahead and turn that on for this object if you want. I'm going to save it there. So it's using AES 256 encryption. In here, we've got metadata. So we created some metadata around it. So we've got the content type and it's an image/PNG. You can add in your own metadata in here. So things like a whole bunch of different things. To be honest, this is completely beyond the scope of the Solutions Architect Associate and Developer Associate course, but you can go through here and add different metadata, perhaps content language, and you want to say English, something like that. Just going to hit cancel. And then in here, we've got our tags for the object. So we can go ahead and tag this object. Now, you remember we've actually tagged the bucket, but the objects within the bucket don't inherit the bucket's tag. So we could go in here and add our tag. We could say, department, and this is owned by the finance team, something like that. So you can tag all the way down to individual objects, but do remember that individual objects do not inherit the bucket tags. We click over here, we go back to overview, and we'll be able just to see who owns this object, when it was last modified, what storage class it's in. We've just changed to server-side encryption, the size of the object, and the minimum size is 0 bytes. That can be a popular exam topic. And then the link here below. So I want to make clear we've been just dealing with this particular object, our aCloudGuru logo.png. We've been playing with the encryption options, with the tags, etc., just on this object. We haven't been doing it at a bucket level though. So let's go ahead and click in here, and let's go ahead and change some of the properties of our bucket. And you can see it's just up here where you can do it. So we can go over to properties, and here we'll see a whole bunch of different things. So we've got versioning, which we're going to cover in the next lab. We've got logging. We've got static website hosting. We've got our tags. We can already see our tag in here. We've got transfer acceleration, and this is basically makes it much easier to transfer very large files up into S3, and I'll have a lecture on that coming up as well. We have events, and we have requester pays in here. So by default, basically everything is disabled or turned off, and these are things that you can go ahead and turn on. In here, we've got our permissions. So right now, our owner access is the only one that has access to this bucket. In here, we could go to everyone, and we could change the permissions. So we could say read bucket permissions or write bucket permissions. Or you could give the ability to list objects within this bucket or write objects in this bucket. I'm not going to do that. I want to keep it, keep it locked down. And essentially, there's two ways to control access to your AWS buckets. We've got the access control list, or bucket ACLs, and then we also have bucket policies, and you can create bucket policies in here. You can go ahead and click policy generator. This will generate a policy for your bucket. So you can say select to policy type. So we have different policy types in here. I'm going to select S3 bucket policy. And in here, we add our statements. So we can say allow or deny our principal. So principal could, basically, it's an Amazon resource name. So here you go, persons who receive the permission in this statement. So it could be an IAM user named Joe. And the way you would do that is you would go and get the Amazon resource name for Joe. Or you could just say star, which is everyone. And then we'll say the AWS service. So what is it that we're allowing? So we're saying we're allowing everyone access to the AWS service S3, and then selections. What actions can they do? So we'll say they could create buckets, they could list buckets, delete buckets, or you could just give them access to everything. So just click in here for all actions, and that will basically allow them to do anything that they want. And then in here, your ARN. So this is the ARN for the bucket that you're using. So I'm not going to do this. I'm going to come back out. This is a little bit beyond the scope of both the Solutions Architect Associate and the Developer Associate course. However, if you are interested in creating your own S3 bucket policy, we do have an S3 masterclass on the aCloudGuru platform, which explores S3 in a lot of details. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back. Okay, so I'm back in my S3 window. In here, we've got cause configuration. We're going to cover that off in another lecture. In here, we've got management, so we've got lifecycle management, we've got replication, so we can actually replicate this bucket and all its objects to another region. In here, we've got analytics, in here, we've got metrics, and in here, we've got inventory, and this is how you configure inventory reports for this bucket. Okay, so what have we learnt in this lab? Well, we've learnt a few different things. We've learnt that buckets are a universal namespace, so you can't have the same name buckets. You couldn't have test bucket, for example. People keep stealing the aCloudGuru names as well. We also learnt that when you upload an object to S3, you're going to receive a HTTP 200 code. We learnt that S3 has 3 different types of storage. So there's normal S3, S3 infrequently accessed, and S3 reduced redundancy storage. We had a brief look at encryption. So you can do encryption a couple of ways. You could actually encrypt it on your client side. So I could encrypt those files on my Mac and then upload them to S3. You can also do server-side encryption, which is what we looked at in the lab. So we just use normal server-side encryption with Amazon S3 managed keys, and that's called SSES3. Other types of encryption, you can do server-side encryption with KMS. We didn't do that in the lab, but you should just be aware of it. And then you can also do server-side encryption encryption, this is where you provide your own keys. And again, we didn't do it in the lab, but you should be aware of it. So there's really 3 types of server-side encryption, and then you have client-side encryption on top of that. We also learned that you can control access to your buckets either using a bucket access control list or ACL, or by using bucket policies. And you need to understand that those are the 2 key ways to control access to your bucket in both associate exams. And then by default, buckets are private and all objects stored inside them are also private. So that is it for this lab, guys. If you've got the time, please join me in the next one where we're going to look at version control.